Tonight, an urgent manhunt in Maine after a gunman killed at least 18 people. Panic and fear after 2 deadly mass shootings. Now grief and anguish from the families.
When you get anything that happens like this, you go empty.
And what we know about the Army reservist turned suspect. Why some Canadians are getting a break on the carbon tax.
We have to make sure we're fighting climate change in ways that supports all Canadians.
At issue on the politics fueling the sudden shift. And the clothing tags may say sustainable.
Just to be clear, no one is actually taking old clothes and turning them into new ones.
Are the big brands really going green? Marketplace investigates.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. A manhunt is intensifying in Maine tonight, where police are looking for the lone suspect in a deadly mass shooting. Local, state, and federal officers are all searching the region. The suspect still believed to be armed and dangerous. As that search continues, the death toll has climbed. 18 lives lost so far, 13 others injured. Already, this is the deadliest mass shooting in the U.S. this year. So Katie Simpson is in Maine tonight at the last known address of the suspect. Katie, seems very quiet there now, but there was a lot of movement there earlier.
Yeah, officers in tactical gear had surrounded this property in this rural area. We saw drones go up in the air, helicopters circling around in the sky, and police on a megaphone shouting, "If you are inside, come out with your hands up. We are not going to hurt you." But after about an hour and a half of intense police activity, the drone came down, the chopper went away, and we saw slowly convoys of police vehicles leaving this area. Officers confirming this scene is cleared and this manhunt is nowhere near over yet. Heavily armed police officers scour a community on edge. The urgent manhunt so consuming and so dangerous, locals remained under orders to stay home and out of the way.
Absolutely shocked. It still doesn't even feel real.
The streets nearly deserted, businesses and schools closed as that shock started to wear off and grieving began.
When you get anything that happens like this, you go empty. And there's just nothing you can do.
Leroy Walker's son, Joseph, managed Smengi's Bar and Grill. He says Joseph's last act was confronting the suspect mid-rampage.
Picked up a butcher knife and went after the gunman to try to stop him from killing other people. And that's when he shot my son to death, trying to save some more lives that he ended up losing his life.
By the time the shooting stopped, Joseph Walker would be among the 8 people killed here, the second location police say Robert Card targeted. The first bullets were fired in a bowling alley. Members of a youth league were among those inside.
I couldn't see her, and everybody was running. And I got caught in people trampling and running out.
Bobby Nichols was bowling with her sister Tricia when those first shots were fired. As Bobby ran for her life, she realized Tricia was not by her side.
And I kept asking, "Where's my sister? Where's my sister? She's in there." And I just wanted to be with my sister, and she was in there.
Tricia never made it out, one of the victims killed here. She too used her final moments trying to help others.
Somebody came out and said that she called 911. And when she called 911 to save everybody, she lost her life because of it.
Katie, you just spoke with police there. What are they telling you?
We're just chatting casually with a couple of officers who've been doing this nearly 20 years. And one of them said to me, this is not necessarily a surprising event in his own community. He says that he lives with the expectation that it's not a matter of if something like this is going to happen, a mass shooting event, but when, even accepting that it would be a reality in his own community. And it sort of speaks to the bigger picture attitude here, even in this moment of crisis.
Terrible. All right, Katie Simpson in Bowdoin, Maine. Thank you. So we're also learning more tonight about the suspect police are looking for, his history, his military background. Thomas Daigle takes us through what we know.
A U.S. Army reservist since 2002 with a recent history of volatile behavior. It wasn't long before police knew who they were hunting.
1042 Robert Card, 4483, operating 2013 Outback 9246.
Records obtained by CBC News show the 40-year-old was a petroleum supply specialist in the Army Reserve, with a series of medals and achievements to his name, including a Humanitarian Service Medal. His cousin says Card also had mental health struggles.
He's got a lot of problems up in his head right now.
While his unit was training at the U.S. Military Academy in New York this past summer, the National Guard tells us Card was seen behaving erratically. The police were called and he was hospitalized, raising questions about his fitness to own a rifle.
The yellow flag law should have been triggered if, in fact, the suspect was hospitalized for 2 weeks for mental illness.
A search of Maine criminal records finds no arrests or convictions other than a single charge of operating a vehicle under the influence in 2007.
The vehicle itself has been located, not the suspect.
The suspect's SUV was found in a nearby town close to a boat ramp by a river that snakes through the woods for kilometers. Social media photos suggest Card had experience on the water. And this former Mountie says Card's knowledge may have helped him evade capture for so long.
He has some tactical training as a reservist in the Army. He is probably fully functional on the use of weaponry, probably is able to evade, conceal, hide.
Investigators won't speculate on a motive, but experts suspect he had a well-established plan, keeping him on the lam for more than 24 hours. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
So as the manhunt continues, along the Canada-U.S. border, officers are being told to remain on high alert.
We have been engaged with our border services agencies and with appropriate police forces to ensure extra protections for Canadians.
Now, the RCMP is also involved, but all border crossings are staying open at this time. Now, those comments from the Prime Minister came as he announced a major change to the federal carbon tax. Rural Canadians are about to get a break. Rafi Boudjikanian now with how much and what's behind the sudden move.
After months of defending his government's signature policy, Justin Trudeau is walking back part of the carbon tax.
But we have to make sure we're fighting climate change in ways that supports all Canadians. That is why today we are announcing a 3-year pause on the federal pollution price on heating oil.
Along with temporarily dropping the tax on heating oil, it's also doubling the rebate for Canadians. And there will be new incentives to switch to heat pumps starting on the East Coast. There is no doubt which part of Canada the pressure was coming from.
We heard our Atlantic MPs and we heard Atlantic Canadians.
Those seats in Atlantic Canada have helped the Liberals stay in power since 2015. For some in the region, the announcement is long overdue.
We don't buy orange juice as often as we used to, because that's a luxury.
For months, Christine McCallum has been making choices between spending money on her heating oil or buying food. She says the rebate will help, but believes Liberals are also doing this to help themselves.
We know very well that Islanders will vote them out.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been climbing in opinion polls largely on cost of living issues. He's skeptical of Trudeau's announcement.
And he said, okay, wait a second, I was just sort of kidding about that carbon tax thing. I'm actually only going to impose it 3 years from now on your home heating after the election is over.
One Atlantic premier hopes Ottawa's move today is just a first step.
I'm hopeful that what comes out of this is really to have an evaluation of the entire carbon tax program.
As Trudeau insists further exemptions to the tax are not in the cards, Conservatives will keep pushing him to get rid of it entirely. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
The war between Israel and Hamas continues to escalate. Already, this has been the deadliest 20 days in the region in decades. From the mass murder of more than 1,400 in Israel by Hamas to Israel's bombing campaign of Gaza, which the Hamas-controlled health authority claims to have killed more than 7,000. As Susan Ormiston shows us now, despite the ferocity of the Gaza siege, militants there are still firing rockets into Israel.
There's an urgency to cleaning up, as if to expunge the message delivered from Gaza rockets. Your family's not safe, still. Daniel Sabi and his wife and son barely escaped the rocket barrage Wednesday night. The full force of it demolished the apartment next door. Israel's Iron Dome failed here. The attack is hardening resolve. There's no choice. If they can reach Rishon and Tel Aviv, we must take care of it. Hamas is a terror organization, he says. Most residents got to shelter, 6 were injured, and the attack leaves an internal wound.
People are so afraid. This morning we're talking to people that are begging us to take them to another place where they can feel protected.
The fact that even after 20 days of bombing Hamas, the rockets still get through shakes Ali Baghdadi's confidence. We were surprised because we expected they should have destroyed their launching capability for long-range rockets. We're surprised they didn't do it with the airstrikes, he said.
Attacks like these put more pressure on the Israeli government to move into Gaza with a ground incursion. That's what many of these residents expect. Last night, tanks and troops did go in a targeted raid.
At least a dozen tanks and troops rolled into northern Gaza, pounding through the boundary fence in what the IDF calls a limited raid, in and out. Preparation for the next stage of combat, it says. By morning, the relentless airstrikes took over. And the casualties keep mounting. More than 7,000 now killed, says the Hamas-controlled health ministry.
I think we're really trying our best to hold ourselves together.
Naala Shawa and her family are sheltering in one house with 53 others south of Gaza City.
When I hear the shelling, especially between like 12 and 3 a.m., which is usually a heavy period, it just kind of imagine, okay, if it's gonna hit here or there, what's gonna be the impact, you know? It's scary.
This bombardment is longer than any she's lived through.
It's hard to think about the future. If there will be anything, it won't be going back.
Back in Israel, sirens again in the same place. A dash for shelter. We go too. This time, the Iron Dome does its job. Here. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Rishon LeZion, Israel.
With the Iron Dome no guarantee and with lingering questions about security failures during Hamas's attack, Margaret Evans spoke with some Israelis taking safety into their own hands by buying guns in growing numbers.
A target range on the edge of Gush Etzion, an Israeli settlement block in the occupied Palestinian territories of the West Bank. The number of Israelis buying guns has jumped in the wake of the October 7th attacks, the government making it easier.
Right now it's in a week. It's very, very quick, very quick.
This is a one-stop shop for training, licensing, and buying a gun if you're Israeli.
I think everyone in Israel, I don't think only in Israel, I think around the world were shaken by what happened.
The gun I got is a Glock 43X. That's the one I chose.
Kalanet Taub, a mother, says she wasn't a gun person before the horrific Hamas attacks.
I feel that the gun is the only option I have to defend myself, and that's why I'm getting one today.
Israeli settlements are considered illegal by much of the international community, built on land the Palestinians hope will one day form part of a Palestinian state. Hardline Jewish religious settlers say the land is theirs by biblical right, and there are fears more guns in the settlements could increase violence toward Palestinians in the wake of October 7th. It was already on the rise, with hardline ultranationalist Itamar Ben-Gvir now in the post of National Security Minister. He's already pledged to hand out 4,000 rifles to settlers in the occupied territories for free. And on Wednesday, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged Israelis to arm themselves privately ahead of an expected Israeli ground invasion into Gaza. It's not only settlers, but people inside Israel too. Tel Aviv journalist Mirav Arlozorov says it reflects the generational trauma the Jewish people carry with them.
People were left for hours in their homes while terrorists were butchering them, burning them alive, and it's a huge trauma. And it really brought out all those basic fears that we must protect ourselves. We used to trust the army to do that. Now we cannot even trust the army.
But she herself is not in favor of relaxing gun laws.
It's a very bad response, and we will regret it.
And these are the most uncertain of times. Margaret Evans, CBC News, in the occupied West Bank.
To southwestern Mexico now, where Hurricane Otis has left at least 27 people dead. The full extent of the damage in Acapulco is becoming clearer tonight as communication returns to the area. Yvette Bren shows us the devastation.
This is the devastation Otis left behind. Acapulco, torn apart. Wow. This sixth-floor apartment, now just a shell.
And I woke up with the sound of the windows kind of like shaking. And I didn't know what was going on. I stepped into the living room and there was no living room, essentially. There was no furniture.
It was a direct hit on the popular resort city with winds up to 260 kilometers per hour that swayed hotels and tore off roofs and destroyed walls. This young tourist says she hid in a bathroom. Mexico's president says Acapulco has suffered a true disaster like they've never seen before.
This is by far the strongest hurricane ever to have occurred on this section of the Mexican coast. And so there just isn't really historical context for this.
Otis grew from a tropical storm to Category 5 in less than 24 hours, and warnings came too late.
Typically, we do have pretty good forecasts for hurricanes. Usually there is much better advance warning than we saw in this case, but clearly that didn't happen this time.
Power and internet are still down. Roads are damaged and the airport remains closed. Now 500,000 people dealing with devastation.
The state Guerrero is one of the poorest states in Mexico. And so I think it's going to be really hard to build back.
And the reality of what this will do to a region that survives on tourism. Yvette Bren, CBC News, Vancouver.
Celebrated Canadian musician Buffy Saint-Marie is speaking out tonight, calling allegations about her Indigenous identity deeply hurtful. In a CBC News Fifth Estate investigation scheduled to air tomorrow, Buffy Saint-Marie's claims to Indigenous ancestry are called into question by family members, genealogical documentation, and historical research. Saint-Marie says she's always been honest that she doesn't know where she's from or who her birth parents were.
These questions hurt me. They still do, but they also hurt others. They're questions I've struggled with my whole life. So what can I say now? I know who I am. I know who I love and who loves me. And I know who claims me. And to those who question my truth, I say with love, I know who I am.
Buffy Saint-Marie is, of course, an award-winning singer-songwriter known for decades of Indigenous activism. She says she was contacted by CBC last month and calls questions about her past, quote, appalling. An NHL player receives a lengthy suspension for violating gambling rules.
Pass in front. They score! What a goal by Pinto!
The fallout from the unprecedented punishment.
I'm sure this is going to be a calculated wake-up call.
Big companies are making some big claims.
The website actually says you're buying this and it's better for the earth.
Oh my God.
CBC Marketplace reveals why it may be misleading. And a whale of a collision caught on camera.
And then I noticed something very large coming out of the water.
We're back in 2. A player with the Ottawa Senators has been suspended for half the regular season for violating the NHL's gambling policy, but the league is giving few details about what exactly Shane Pinto did. Cam McIntosh now on what we do know.
Oh, it is brought in by Pinto again. He'll shoot it.
In his rookie season last year, 20 goals. Ottawa Senators center Shane Pinto was a strong bet for another big season this year.
Shane Pinto didn't miss that one. He's
Now suspended half a season for violating the NHL's wagering policy.
We don't know exactly what he did.
NHL writer Greg Wyshynski says the league is sending a big message.
I mean, this is the first time we've seen somebody get in trouble with the NHL sports wagering rules, and I'm sure this is going to be a calculated wake-up call.
In a statement, the NHL would only confirm the suspension, 41 games for activities relating to sports wagering, adding the league's investigation found no evidence that Pinto made wagers on NHL games. That part is critical.
The problem with betting as a player is that if you have some information that you believe might influence tonight's game, then that's almost the equivalent of insider trading.
Connor's just finishing up.
Since 2018, the NHL and other North American pro leagues have been warming up to betting. NHL athletes even endorsing it.
Drain that 3!
All of it, though, with strict rules and inherent risks. European soccer is currently facing a couple of scandals of players breaking betting rules.
But Pinto scores!
Pinto apologized in a statement. The Senators say he will be welcome back. While it's unclear exactly how he broke the NHL's rules, his suspension was negotiated with the league and NHL Players Association. The gaming industry points to the Pinto case as an example of checks and balances working.
The rules were there for a purpose to protect the integrity of sport and betting. They're important to be there.
As for how big a role gaming plays in the NHL, when it was first introduced, the American Gaming Association estimated revenues of over $200 million. Their estimates now, that's grown to over $500 million. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Fast fashion brands are producing more and more clothes they say are sustainable.
This is 100% recycled poly.
But is it a case of greenwashing? CBC Marketplace investigates. And Rosie's here with that issue. Hey, Rosie.
Hey, Adrian. Tonight we're going to talk about Trudeau's changes to the carbon tax on home heating oil.
Certain features of that pollution price needed to be adjusted to work for everyone.
Is this a backtrack, and why is it happening now? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
Some big fashion brands are making big promises about clothing that's better for the planet. But a Marketplace investigation found some of what you're wearing is far from sustainable. Charles Ciagro shows us why.
Fashion's top trend this season, sustainability.
Made with 79% recycled polyester. These are 100% recycled polyester.
Marketplace found recycled polyester products selling at top retailers across the country.
This is 100% recycled poly. The website actually says you're buying this and it's better for the earth.
Oh my God.
This sustainable fashion expert says there's a big problem with the recycled polyester some of fashion's big brands are pushing. Recycled polyester isn't made from old clothes at all. Most of it is made from used plastic bottles.
If you're using plastic bottles, you're actually taking bottles out of a potentially closed-loop recycling system and then giving them a one-way ticket to landfill disposal.
Canadians generate about 500 million kilograms of textile waste every year. That's enough to fill about 15,000 trucks like that.
Scientist turned advocate Linda Greer says turning plastic bottles into clothes won't help make a dent in the mountains of fashion waste the world produces each year.
What we really need is we need to go clothing to clothing recycling.
Currently, less than 1% of the world's fashion waste is recycled in the truest sense of the word. It takes time and is expensive.
So just to be clear, no one is actually taking old clothes and turning them into new ones.
No one is doing clothing recycling at scale, definitely.
H&M, The Gap, and Lululemon all told Marketplace they're exploring new technologies and that more work needs to be done to find truly sustainable solutions. Until then, Linda has a simple one.
I mean, the good solution is we need to buy less clothes.
Charles Ciagro, CBC News, Toronto.
So now let's break down the news shaping our world. Rosie's here with that issue.
At issue this week, a backtrack on the carbon tax on home heating oil, a move primarily aimed at Atlantic Canada.
We're adjusting policies so that they have the right outcome. We are doubling down on our fight against climate change.
The Conservatives have been hammering the Liberals on the tax, and today, Poilievre claimed victory. Is this about good policy or good politics? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see everyone. I asked there if it's good policy or good politics, but I could also ask perhaps it is neither. So I'll get everybody to weigh in. Chantal, how much of a surprise is this, and how much of a climb down is this for the Liberals?
On the core policy, they will tell you that it's symbolic, but symbols matter when it's your core policy, and it is a significant climb down. You asked, is it good policy or good politics? I think it's neither. It basically sends the message that everything is negotiable in the Liberal legacy. Including the carbon tax. It also allows people who heat their homes with natural gas to ask, why not us?
Yep.
If heating is an affordability issue. Once you go down that path, why do you stop at oil? And it is impossible to sell this as doubling down, as the Prime Minister said, on climate change policy.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask that, Andrew. That the Prime Minister went to some lengths to say people can't get these these heating pumps they need in Atlantic Canada. This is going to buy them some time to do that, and we'll end up in a better place. Those are his words. I don't know what you make of that kind of justification.
Well, I think it's a lot more about trying to buy time or buy seats for the Liberal Party. Let's be clear, this is almost entirely about Atlantic Canada. When they talk about rural Canada, that's for the Liberal Party, that's mostly Atlantic Canada. They don't have a lot of rural seats anywhere else. When you talk about home heating oil, that's overwhelmingly in Atlantic Canada. Everyone west of the Ottawa River, they're heating their homes with, or mostly heating their homes with natural gas or other types of things. Mm-hmm. So, if you're heating your home with natural gas, you don't get the tax break. If you do it with heating oil, you do. It only lasts for 3 years, conveniently, until after the next election. Then who knows what happens after that. I think what you're hearing is the sound of a dam bursting. Because as Chantal said, if you can do it for this group of voters, you're already seeing the NDP saying, why aren't you doing it for other types of voters? You're basically axing the tax, quote unquote, for some Canadians and not for others. Even in this country, that's a hard thing to really sustain. So I think you're going to see pressure now, and you're going to see pressure from within the Liberal caucus. Because when you're at 25% of the polls, it's harder for it to crack the whip if you're the Prime Minister than even if you're at 30 or 35%. And the problem he's really got is they're not even doing in a such situation where they can replace him. It's not that people are going to be necessarily trying to get rid of him. It just may be that they'll start to not listen to him and not follow his lead. And so this is the kind of desperation moves you start to see to try and keep people within the tent.
Okay, so what about the idea, though, that Althea, that this does actually help people? That's what this is all about, was trying to help people, especially through the winter, and they're not going to have to pay this extra cost. Do they get any points for trying to deal with that issue?
Yeah, so I see it somewhat differently. I actually think this is an example of how politics is supposed to work. First of all, I think a lot of people don't actually understand how the carbon pricing system works, and the government has not invested a lot of capital in explaining to people how how it actually is supposed to work. And yes, I'm not denying Andrew's point. The Liberals started in June at 50% support in Atlantic Canada, and they dropped 20 points over the summer. The main reason being that the federal carbon tax kicked in as a federal backstop on July 1st, and people started to notice it. Combine that with Mr. Poilievre doing rallies all over Atlantic Canada and spending a lot of money on ads saying axe the tax and it's making everything more expensive. But you have a lot of MPs in Atlantic Canada, a lot of Liberal MPs in Atlantic Canada who have been hearing for their constituents that this is making life much more unaffordable rather. I had an interview with many caucus members in the lead up to that big caucus meeting in September, and one of the gentlemen I spoke with, Ken McDonald from Newfoundland, one of the first things he told me was how he had told his colleagues about this widow in his riding who basically has a really hard time making ends meet. If the fuel charge was going to be what it is, she'd have to wear a blanket throughout the winter, that she can't afford chicken, she only eats it once a week when her niece comes to visit him, and there were going to be lots of stories in that direction. Yes, of course they're worried about losing seats. But also, I think there has to be a recognition that if you enact a policy, it has to be fairly applied. And it is true that people in Atlantic Canada don't actually have that many choices. Putting home heating aside, they're all part of this announcement was also the rural rebate increasing to 20% as opposed to 10%. There isn't a bus service for them to take to go to work every day. So I don't think it's bad policy. I think they're making the policy more receptive to people who may not understand it. There's a lot of details missing from the policy. It is a pilot program now just for Atlantic Canada, so it would be nice to know a little bit more about how this is going to roll out. But it is okay to have a policy that is electoral based and also more practical, because at the end of the day, you want people to adopt more technology like the heat pump, so you have to make that accessible to
Andrew,
them.
go ahead.
It's one thing to be responsive. Let's remember that they do actually get the tax rebated to them, and they're going to increase the rebate. And I don't think anybody has a problem with that. But if the cost of these kinds of changes is you make the thing incoherent, then I think you've got to really wonder what you're achieving. Remember, to get part of the whole exercise of making the carbon tax work in the long term is people have to believe it's going to continue to apply. If they're going to make investments based upon that, long-term investments, they have to believe it's going to stick around. At this point, people have to be wondering, what's the next piece that's going to fall off? What's the next thing they're going to jettison to try and save their skins on this? And that's going to, I think, have really negative effects on people's long-term planning as to, is this going to survive the next election or even the next 2 years?
But it's not just a halt, right? It's a halt in order for you to get more heat pumps on, to replace your home heating. So that part I think is really quite significant, and they can't be uncoupled.
Okay, Chantal.
I can't wait to see the rush on heat pumps in Atlantic Canada. But meanwhile, does anybody seriously want to argue that if the Liberals were ahead in the polls, they would have had today's announcement?
Absolutely
or
not.
Or that this is a doubling down on climate policy? I look at this, and what I see is a government that is beholden to the NDP and to buy time to try to salvage itself, and that is being pushed by Pierre Poilievre into retreating on its core policies. And at the end of the day, I've watched caucuses walk to the slaughterhouse under Brian Mulroney, for one, because they believed in what they were doing. This, to me, is like Brian Mulroney waking up one morning and saying the polls are really bad, so I'm going to back off on the GST.
Well, that's a significant parallel. I'm sort of wondering why it didn't happen before now. I mean, for all the points that you've all made, okay, it's not great to walk away from a core policy, but if you're going to do it, why did it take so long to get to a point where you thought that this was going to help people?
And why did you vote against it a year ago when a similar motion was presented?
A year ago this week. That's right.
The answer is...
I don't think Ken McDonald did.
No, Ken McDonald didn't. Quickly,
no, but that's not the government.
The answer is
announcing.
you're at 25% in the polls, and I think Chantal makes a very important point. This is going to really hurt Trudeau's moral legitimacy with his own base. I mean, he's in enough trouble with the rest of the country, but with his own base of people who, would say what you will, he's done the right thing on climate change. if you rob the moral legitimacy of that by basically hollowing out the policy, then you're going to face the music on that too.
But what is the point of having a policy if no one actually changes their habits? So if you encourage them to change their habits and they do, but this makes it easier for people to do so, right? Like I think that's a good way to.
You don't even know that they won't change the habits because you're talking about something that kicks in on July 1st, and now suddenly it doesn't work. Also, that clip from the Prime Minister that says our price on carbon is not giving the results that we expected. Believe me, it's going to be taken out of context. I mean, Justin Trudeau has himself admitted that carbon pricing doesn't work.
Okay, last word to Althea.
And that is really damaging over the long term.
Last word to Althea, then I got
I don't disagree with that. I just think at the core of it, in a country, you want people to have buy-in to a policy that is like this, and fairness is important. And a lot of rural Canadians in Atlantic Canada and elsewhere felt that they were being punished for choices that they actually cannot make. So I don't think it's a bad thing that the government is responding to that.
Okay, I enjoyed that conversation. Thank you all. Okay, we're going to take a small break here, but when we return, we'll talk about Pierre Poilievre's private member's bill to ban vaccine mandates. Pierre Poilievre's private member's bill on vaccine mandates was defeated. Why is he still talking about them? That's next on The National. A push by Pierre Poilievre to ban vaccine mandates voted down by MPs.
Let us recognize that Canadians have freedom of choice over what they put into their body.
We have always stood up for the safety of Canadians while he chooses to wear a tinfoil hat.
But why is Poilievre talking about vaccine mandates again? Let's bring everybody back to talk about that and break it down. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Althea, why don't you start us off on this one? Obviously, this was a private member's bill. No one expected it to pass, but there were speeches and a lot of energy dedicated to it this week. What did you make of why this was happening?
Well, I have no choice because it was introduced and it gets second reading and then there's a vote. So it went as far as it could go. But, this isn't a bill about vaccine mandates. It is specifically about COVID-19 vaccine mandates, basically about federal employees that are in federal industries being not having to have them be part of a mandate. So it's really a response to the 2021 campaign, and yet it was introduced last year, only for political reasons during the leadership race. It is completely dated. It has no point. I mean, it's kind of an embarrassment that even conservatives that agree with this would think that this is worth wasting House time on because it's a dead issue. Even when it was introduced, it was a dead issue. So it is purely it's just an advertisement so Pierre Poilievre can put some targeted ads on social media. Beyond that, there was no point. So it's not a surprise.
Is it a risk to be talking about these things, Chantal, again, or is there too much, or is there a lot of benefit there to be raising it again?
And I don't think there's a lot of benefit there. I think anything that detracts from the cost of living conversation, where obviously, as mentioned before, they're doing fairly well, is not a good day for the Conservatives. It's also divisive because even within the Conservative Party, there's no agreement on this. And me personally, I have a bit of problem with a party that is so unanimous in defending bodily autonomy, but it is so divided on abortion rights for women. But that's just me seeing a contradiction on where bodily autonomy seems to stop for part of that caucus.
Andrew.
You might say the same for drug policy as well. Look, I think on the right they call this virtue signaling. It is supremely pointless. There was no way this was going to pass. It's pointless another way in that I don't see why you'd want to rule out in advance something that's been part of the public health toolkit in one shape or another for 200 years and just for COVID. And if it did come to that, you could be overturned by just passing legislation to make a vaccine mandate legal. So it's purely for show. It's purely for politics. I might disagree a little bit with Chantal in that I think if they were investing a great deal of time and emphasis and focus on this, absolutely, it would be pulling them away from their hardcore economic message in a way that wouldn't be helpful. But as a nod to the PPC type of voter, and to that element of their own coalition. It's probably something in that of just keeping that locked down, giving them a hint, a signal that we're sympathetic to your concerns, and then you can go back to your economic messaging. So as stupid and pointless as it is, it may be good politics.
Chantal?
Of course, they're gambling, and I hope that they win that gamble, that within the next 2 years, we will not have a resurgence of this pandemic or a new pandemic.
Yeah.
I think, it's interesting what Andrew said about kind of throwing them a bone, because in Pierre Poilievre's speech at the Conservative Convention in Quebec City, his wife introduced him, and she had a nod to the truckers' convoy and how great it was to have them here in Ottawa. And so they are trying to keep that electoral cohort in the fold, if you wish. But they didn't really have a choice, because the alternative was to say to Pierre Poilievre that he doesn't make a speech. Like the bill had come in the schedule to be debated this week, so the vote was happening. If they had decided to yank him, the message would have been worse to those individuals. So I think, they didn't really have a choice.
Yeah, he was at a rally tonight, other than the axe the tax message. This came up at the rally again tonight, and it did get loud applause at a very large rally, another very large rally that he. But it seems strange to me that this would be an ongoing, motivating issue for a voter. Andrew, I can understand people might still be upset about it. I just don't know how it's still a motivating voter by the time we get to the next election, whenever that is.
It's not because it has any substantive importance. I agree with that. But in the realm of culture war, symbolic politics, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on it. I wouldn't be talking about it much beyond today. Yeah. But as a way of just sending up a smoke signal saying, we get it, we understand your concerns. There's something in that.
What does that tell you then, though, Chantal, about Pierre Poilievre's leadership if he still has to do that, right? That he still has to engage in what Andrew calls a culture war?
That they're taking no chances, but I still believe that this is something that the Liberals, if they're still fit to campaign in a year and a half to 2 years, can exploit, because it is a real concern for many people, and it is a question that this does not bring a reassuring answer to for a majority of Canadians. What would happen if Pierre Poilievre was the Prime Minister during a pandemic?
A pandemic that might look very different, like a smallpox pandemic or something where,
could actually be worse.
Exactly. That he would be willing to deny himself a tool to use. I think to the point about mobilization, you still want, in this electoral cycle that we have and the fundraising rules that we have, you still want to keep your supporters in the fold. And one way to do that and to keep going back to them for money is to make sure that you're still talking to the issues that they care about. And so all of that is really just about keeping supporters that you brought into the tent mobilized and engaged and ready to knock on doors when the time comes.
And he may have a little more latitude to indulge in this as well, because I think a certain proportion of centrist voters may now reach the point where they're just bound and determined to get rid of the Liberals, and they will not be they'll be more willing to tolerate stuff that they don't like seeing from the Conservatives, because they've just kind of made that choice.
Well, especially if they think it's not going to happen again, or they hope it's not going to happen again. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate your good conversation, your smart thoughts this week. And with that, I'll send things back to Adrian in Toronto.
Thank you, Rosie. Next, a crazy collision on the Pacific Ocean.
It got higher and bigger until it was above my head.
A humpback whale takes this Aussie down under in our moment. Believe it or not, this is the instant just after impact when a whale collided with Jason Breen while he was out wing foiling. So it happened just off the coast of Australia, and as Breen will tell you himself, he is lucky to have escaped with his life. The epic whale tale is our moment.
I was out there just having a great time looking around the ocean, and then I noticed something very large coming out of the water. I knew straight away it was a whale because I could see its head coming up, and then it got higher and bigger until it was above my head. And at that stage I could see the whole whale above me, and that's when I thought, I could be in trouble here. I can feel it hit my face and my body, And from there, I get dragged under the water with the whale. It gets caught and tangled in my leg rope or my leash. I make it about 20 to 30 feet under when all of a sudden I feel my leg rope snap, and that's what releases me and allows me to come up. The leash snapping saved my life, so yeah, very lucky. So look, I told my wife after it happened, look, I've just been hit by a whale, but I'm okay. When she got the message, she couldn't believe it. But yeah, as far as injuries, not too bad, mate. Just a few sore muscles, that's all.
I want to, did the whale think it was lunch? I'm not really sure what happened there, but a couple things he's very grateful for. Yes, that snapping leash, but also the GoPro, because that kind of story, you go home to tell that, you don't have video evidence, it didn't happen. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app. Subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.